now, because otherwise I'll forget. So we have a few more people joining us there. So I'm going to just admit those people. Okay. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Roisin Cahalan. I'm the founding member, I suppose, of the Complete Dancer Project, and we like to bring you lots of interesting talks and resources that help improve the performance and the health and well-being of Irish dancers of all standards across the age range. So this evening we are delighted to welcome Dr. Mark Campbell. So Mark Campbell is a sports and performance psychologist, and he's a senior lecturer in sports exercise and performance psychology at the University of Limerick here in Ireland. His primary research interests focus on exploring cognition in action, and he also specialises in mental skills training and sports psychology interventions with athletes and coaches. He's the founding chairman of the Division of Sport, Exercise and Performance Psychology of the Psychological Society of Ireland. And he was an absolutely huge hit at our Get the Edge symposium that we held a year or two ago, where we delivered talks across lots of different facets of wellness and performance in dance. But tonight he's going to talk about performance anxiety, something dancers and teachers and parents know all about, goal setting, building resilience and optimizing mental performance. So I'd like to ask, if possible, that everyone keeps their mics muted. You can type in a question whenever you want, and Mark is also very happy to answer questions at the end of the talk this evening. So if there's anything in particular that you want him to expand on, because he's going to touch on lots of areas, he's very happy to do that. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Mark, so you can take it away.
That's great. Thanks very much, Roisin. Hi, folks. You're very welcome for attending. I suppose the purpose of tonight's talk will be about 40 minutes of, I suppose, mental skills for Irish dancing, how to deal with, performance anxiety or performance stress, a little bit around goal setting, a little bit around resilience and things like that. So like Roisin said, I'm very happy to answer questions at the end. If you want to type them as you go, I think we can probably just work through them towards the end as well. But so I suppose we'll just get started. I've been working with Roisin now, as she mentioned there, on the Complete Dancer Project for the last couple of years. We've done some workshops, and we've collaborated together on the Roisin's book there, The Complete Irish Dancer, which was an absolute pleasure. So it's nice to use some of the material from that tonight and bring you some decent information. Hopefully you can take some stuff away. Okay, so the session overview then really is kind of what use is it for you? So you being a parent, a coach, a physio, maybe a psychologist, or maybe a performer yourself, maybe a dancer. I suppose we'll probably, by the end of it, we'll probably have tackled this idea of what psychology is, and hopefully what it isn't, because I think some people just think psychology is some sort of motivational tool that you pound the table before going out to give a performance, and it really isn't. I suppose psychology is more just about knowing yourself and knowing what to do in certain situations and how you're feeling and how you're thinking and so on. I'm particularly interested, as Roisin alluded to there, around this idea of expertise or performance excellence and how we approach that. And when we talk about approaches to performance excellence, I think we're really talking about training and practice. And I suppose in a setting like Irish dancing, like in a lot of other sports and performance domains, the training can be very regimental, and it can be quite, I suppose, brain dead in some ways. And so far as a lot of the, a lot of the history and a lot of the context is sort of repetition, and we call it mindless repetition sometimes, and that it's, it's just these kind of reps that people need to get. But we know from sports science, and we know from sports psychology that, the better people practice, the better they perform, and better practice isn't necessarily longer practice. So I suppose we'll kind of touch on that as well. We'll also touch on kind of managing performance anxiety. So performance anxiety is just, I suppose it's ever present around things we do, whether it be giving a talk over Zoom from my home, or getting ready, lining up backstage to perform at a dance session. And I suppose by the end of it, maybe what's next for you. might be a question that you might be able to answer a little bit better than you were at the start. So what is it that you should do next, or what is that your performer should do next? And I suppose really the key thing is that mental skills and approaches to mental performance are very much the same as physical training and physical preparation. We really shouldn't neglect the mental side of it. We shouldn't just think we have it or we don't have it. I think most mental skills require little bits of attention, little bits of kind of reiteration and practice. So it's nice to actually note the importance of it, and then maybe a couple of little strategies for how you might actually do that. So, okay. All right, so I suppose psychology essentially is, if we keep it really simple, it's about knowing yourself, knowing thyself. And we talk about knowing yourself insofar as in a performance context, knowing yourself is knowing how you're thinking. Are your thoughts particularly negative? Are you, particularly nervous around the upcoming performance you're about to give? What do you do in a situation like that to calm your nerves? Do you amp yourself up, get psyched up, or do you need to kind of psych yourself down? Do you need to relax and not talk to other people, be in a room by yourself with headphones on, or do you need to be chatting to your friends and buzzing and kind of gearing up for the performance? What kind of behaviors do you have? Do you know what behaviors you do when you are nervous or when you are about to perform? What actions are they that you do? How do you feel? What kind of emotions are you feeling? So knowing yourself is knowing that you're ready to perform, or knowing that you might need to do something, have a chat with yourself. We call this self-talk. Self-coach yourself, self-reinforce yourself, give yourself some confidence going out there. So very, very, very simply, psychology is about knowing yourself. And I suppose that's the key message in this presentation this evening is how well do you know yourself, particularly in that kind of performance domain? What is an acceptable level of nerves or anxiety? And when do you know you're kind of reaching that threshold of excessive nerves or excessive anxiety, which might be very debilitating, because we've all kind of had that very debilitating nervy experience, which isn't particularly nice. But I think in some ways we need some of that to actually perform well. We can't be like very zen going out there either. And I suppose just to reiterate this point, we talk about this idea of an optimal zone of functioning or an optimal zone of performance. And I just give you 3 examples here of 3 different athletes. And I just kind of put this question to yourselves: which athlete are you, or which athlete were you? Were you athlete 1 who needed very low arousal? So we think about this axis here, we see really high arousal, the higher, the longer it goes on. So athlete 1 is this very zen person who needs to be on their own in a room, headphones in, ignoring everyone, trying to keep their arousal levels right down, trying to just be as relaxed as possible. And if they get too amped up, it leads them to particularly poor or suboptimal performance. Or are some of you athlete 2, where you need that kind of fine line between being totally buzzing and totally relaxed, that kind of nice, safe middle ground? Or are you athlete 3 who needs to be, punching holes in walls and getting really fired up about an upcoming performance? And I suppose this kind of comes back to this idea of psychology about knowing yourself. What is it that you need in certain situations? Are you an athlete 3, and do you need to get psyched up? So do you need people around you who will help you to do that, or some music or some imagery scripts or something like that to get you kind of revved up? Or do you need that kind of relaxation, come down, controlling your breathing, meditate, all these kind of things which we might do to bring ourselves back down to a level where you can perform your best? So knowing if you're athlete 1, 2, or 3 is a lovely place to start. So hopefully you'll have seen what type of an athlete you are. And I have to say, I think I'm athlete 2 in my former athletic life. Okay, I suppose really simply to start with, and this slide kind of works better when people are in front of me, but anyway, I'll keep going. When climbing Everest, what is the goal? And normally when I ask people this, when climbing Everest, what is the goal? Most of the class or most of the attendees will say, oh, it's to get to the top. And I mean, it's not incorrect really, because getting to the top is what you're there on Everest to do. It's to reach the summit. But the unfortunate statistics around Everest are that a third of people who reach the summit don't make it back down. So it's a pretty scary statistic. And I suppose this leads to this idea of goal setting, a kind of an extreme example of goal setting. If your goal is to reach the summit, once you've reached it, you're absolutely knackered, tired, you're wrecked, and you have a very difficult descent back down, low on oxygen, functioning, very suboptimally at this stage because you've reached this goal. You've had that high of getting there, and now it's kind of a bit of a drain to get back down, which is where mistakes happen. So what is it around the goal of Everest is to obviously make it back down to base camp safely, but it sounds like such a buzzkill goal, really, doesn't it? So I suppose the key thing about climbing Everest from a goal setting point of view is probably all the little goals you'll have along the way, all those things you'll do to get there and you'll do after you've got there, and how you might plan around it. Very interesting documentary a few months back from a guy called Alex Honnold. He's a free climber. I'm not sure if any of you have seen it. It was on Disney Plus and so on. But he free climbed all these very high mountains, and in it he talks about goal setting and how he plans his goals for the climb he's about to do. Is he plans every movement that he makes on the climb up and on the climb down. And it sounds very detailed. And he says he literally just rehearses these over and over again. He writes them down and then he imagines the kind of moves he's doing and how he's getting up and how he's getting down. And I suppose it's a lovely example of, a really elite level performer and the lengths they go to in terms of the goals that they have, and that the goals that they have seem very ordinary because they're just a whole series, a whole process of little mini goals to achieve along the way. So when we think about goal setting, I think a lot of us get stuck with this closed goal of reach the top, get back safely, and we think or we neglect the bits in between. And in an Irish dancing context, the bits in between are each practice session, each training session, each gym session, each fitness session, each smaller performance event versus bigger performance events, or ones that matter more to them, and so on. So when we talk about goal setting, we need to talk about goal clarity. How clear are the goals you set for yourself or for your performer? Do they understand what it is that they're trying to do in the session that they're in, and maybe how that impacts them, over the coming weeks or season or series of events? I love this idea of open goals. So open goals is a kind of a newish area in psychology where they talk about open goals versus closed goals, and closed goals being what we traditionally associate goal setting with, which is to win your match or to medal or to get on the podium or whatever. The really, really hard to control goals, I suppose, in some ways. Open goals are those kind of ones which you always have, which is to challenge yourself, to have fun, to, really take the most out of it or notice how well you've done in particular situations. And they're quite nice if you can get them right and you can think about what it is that the goal actually serves, what purpose the goal serves, as opposed to closed goals. So if we move on to this idea of practice or training, it's kind of a pet topic of mine. I suppose I just want to flip it and call it the practice of challenge. And when we think about the practice of challenges, we think about, what should a training session look like? Should it be difficult? Should it be hard? Should there be a mixture of difficult parts to it and easier parts to it? Should it be very comfortable? Should it allow the dancer to get ready or to feel really confident about what it is they need to do next? Is it particularly technical? And so on. And I suppose by just throwing all these bits out there, you're probably thinking, God, there's a nice mix there, really. I suppose it really does depend on the session. And it really does depend on this idea of peaking at the right time. So if you're trying to peak for a big performance, what are the challenges associated with peaking for the performance that might be 2 or 3 or 4 weeks away? And what kind of goals or open goals do you need to have along that way to actually get you to enjoy the journey and feel really ready and feel really confident by the time it comes around? So do we do easier sessions towards the end when people are just trying to get more confidence around what it is they're doing and they can see that they can do it, and we have the more challenging stuff at the beginning? Or do we strike that balance between, you know, a couple of difficult, tricky sessions followed by a couple of easier, more comfortable sessions? So it's just to try to think around that. And I suppose the key message here really is like, do you set goals for practice sessions? And, you know, I've worked in professional rugby, and I've worked in elite golf, and I've worked in lots of different performance domains. And I'm always amazed by really top level performers and how little goals they set for training or for practice. And training and practice really is where some of the really essential maintenance or the essential work is done. And it's probably even more important to have goals in these sessions than it would be for performance. So I try to highlight this to people, and it makes a lot of sense. But I think in some team sports, what happens is they just expect a lot of guidance and a lot of direction. And maybe you're a coach, or maybe you're a parent, and maybe you're the one providing all these goals and guidance and so on. But I suppose that it's an interesting point to think about involving the performer in the setting of goals for practice sessions. So maybe they can really understand it, and they can really sink their teeth into it and really see how they're progressing. Because the key question sometimes is, how do you know you're a better dancer this week than last week? How do you know you're a better dancer this month than last month, this year than last year? And I suppose it's a difficult question, because there might be limited events to perform in, and it might be based on how they've performed in those events. But we know there's a very subjective adjudication process as well. So you might feel like it's kind of out of your control. You might feel like you performed well, but you didn't come in the top 3 or the top 5 or whatever it might be. So how do you actually judge your performances? And again, it comes back to good psychology, good knowing yourself. I hit a lot of the goals that I set for myself. I was quite comfortable out there. I managed my anxiety, and I thought I performed particularly well, but the judges obviously didn't see it that way, or whatever it might be. So these are kind of things to just get you aware of, and maybe start that process of, you know, can I set goals for myself for the performances I'm about to do? And do these goals actually make me more resilient, more confident, more competent at what it is that I'm trying to do, rather than use it as a stick to beat me? You know, I'm just not good enough yet. I can't get that technical move down. It's just really bothering me, etc., etc. So really think about how you set goals and how they actually work for you in particular situations. So just to kind of get you thinking around that. So if we think about performance, then what lies beneath? And this is a particularly nice analogy. And a guy called Anders Ericsson, is a famous psychologist. He actually just died recently, from Sweden, but based in Florida. He talked about deliberate practice, and he had a famous kind of statement around, you know, are champions born or made? And I always ask people, are champions born or made? And they'll always say like, oh, Rory McIlroy or Michael Jordan or all these great athletes, sure, they were born, like they were just phenomenal athletes, supremely talented, etc., etc. But the thing that most people don't really understand sometimes is the consensus for champions being born or made is almost exclusively that champions are made. So how good you become at a certain performance or in a certain domain is almost exclusively down to how much practice you do, how intensively you practice, and how much you know about it is that the practice that you're doing. So if we think about the little p is the performance on the day itself, lining up, doing your performance and getting placed at a certain level, win, lose, etc. But the big P, all the bits that's hidden beneath the water, is all the preparation that goes in, all the practice sessions, all the maybe reflections and chats with coaches and chats with parents and chats with other people, all the coaching that goes in, all the technical refinements and all the tactics and so on. And we don't see this on the day, and we probably don't even care too much about it because we're trying to gear up for this little P event, which is down the road. But the big P area is where all the hard work goes in. So it's probably an area to really focus on sometimes, and to think about, you know, the type, duration and intensity of practice you do a lot of the time determines how good you're going to be at that particular activity. It's not this question of talent. So talent is what happens after you've put in the the particular type of training that you're doing. Okay, so if we think about what are the most important skills for Irish dance, and I've just come up with a few, I suppose. We might think about motivation. I mean, motivation being key to putting in long hours and getting routines down and putting in that kind of the necessary work that's needed there. A passion as well, you know, passion for dance, a passion for, you know, challenging yourself, a passion for like the whole area. Maybe it's more mental than that. Maybe it's about staying focused or concentrating. Maybe it's about being aware of your body or being very aware of your body and how your body is doing in space and moving and how tied in it is to, I suppose, even range of motion, the range of motion that you might have. And then it might be around this idea of self-confidence. And we say self-confidence all the time because I think we can become very reliant on others to give you confidence, very reliant on parents or coaches to tell them they're doing well or to tell them their routines look great or whatever it might be. But I think a lot of the time the best performers, the most expert performers have a lot of self-confidence and self-coaching that they're able to give themselves when they have these setbacks or when they have these moments of doubt. And I suppose if you're thinking about getting better performers, it might be that you're getting them more equipped or more able to be confident in particular situations or to derive confidence even from trickier, more difficult situations that they encounter. And I'm sure there's loads more, so ... because depending on where you're coming from with around dance or around Irish dance, you might have very technical skills that you think should be in there. You might have very physical skills that might be in there, mental and tactical. So I suppose we talk about adjudication for Irish dance. We talk about this idea of really small margins. Small margins matter in any performance domain because when you get to a more elite level with dance, there's a lot of people doing the very same amount of training across the board because of the context they're in or the kind of culture of training that they are there. So the small margins are the different areas that might be able to tap into. And those small margins can be psychology or can be tactical, or they can be these other areas, this kind of holistic approach to Irish dancing or to performance, which Roisin touches upon in the book as well when we look at that idea of holistic approach to performance. So if we think about it, we can divide it up physically, technically, tactically, and psychologically. But I suppose, like with any other performance or sport, there might be a real lean towards one there. It might be very physical and very technically oriented. So the culture and the training and the approach, the ethos around Irish dance might be that there is a hell of a lot of physical training to do and there's a hell of a lot of technical coaching to be done or to be imparted onto athletes and dancers. And there might be very little tactical and very little psychological stuff, which is the case in some areas. So these four quadrants aren't all the same size. The physical training and the technical might be 70 or 80% of dance performance or Irish dance performance. But if there is elements that are tactical or psychological, then these should be trained or practiced as well. And I suppose that's the key part. They don't need to be as of equal importance, but they need to be looked after on a regular basis, just like everything else. So if we think about dance performance, what other areas crop up here into it? And we think maybe more towards the mental or the psychological side of it. What strategies do people have to cope with performance stress? How do you cope in certain situations? You know, as parents and coaches and adults, you know, how do we cope with performance stress in the workplace or with our own performances and so on? Do we take a few deep breaths? Do we go to a coach? Do we talk to someone? Do we have a little support network there that we can tap into? I suppose through experience and through maybe doing it for a certain amount of time, we have this knowledge built up that we can tap into other people, that we can get confidence from other people, that we can use deep breathing or meditation to bring ourselves down, or we can listen to music, or we can write out positive mantras to kind of psych ourselves up. how do we adapt and maintain high levels of emotional control, composure, focus, concentration, enjoyment? I think it's kind of lost sometimes when we get really into performance, isn't it? It's, you know, it can be very emotive, and we can win and we can lose, and we can be super disappointed, or we can be super high after winning or placing better than you thought you might do. And sometimes we just forget about this idea of enjoyment. And athletes need to enjoy their sports, and the more professional and the more elite they get, the less they enjoy their sports, which is definitely not a good thing. So I suppose we need to remember that sometimes the training needs to be around enjoyment, the preparation needs to be around enjoyment, and they need to remind themselves why they love Irish dancing, why they have a passion for it. You know, I think that can really sustain people through the long hours that need to be put in as well. So just to remember that, maybe goals around enjoyment or goals around composure and control, because this is what can happen when things are out of your control. You can get very emotional around decisions that are made, or adjudications and so on. So how do we, what strategies do we have to deal with that? And do they actually work, or do we do the same things over and over again, which tends to be a very cyclical thing with human behavior, right? And then acceptance, you know, accept the things I can control, accept the things I can't control, and just do my thing. And if it's good enough, you know, I'll be happy with that. And good enough being very subjective, obviously, and so on. So this idea of acceptance can be an interesting concept for performers, because how do I accept maybe performing what I thought was a good performance, but maybe it not being placed highly and others not thinking that same way? Or do I accept that it's better than last week, which is still maybe not where I want to get to? So this idea of incremental steps and performing better each time I do my thing. Okay, so I suppose again, this idea of a holistic approach to dance performance, where are the easy gains to be made? You know, as a coach or as a parent or as a performer, what areas can I tighten up or have a look at to gain various things from? You know, personal life, lifestyle, physical training, tactical training, technical training, mental training. Where are the easy wins? Where are the gains to be made? And I suppose sometimes we do very little mental training, so the gains are really easy. It's like, oh, do you know what? I'm going to start setting a few goals for each practice session I have. I'm going to maybe have a little think after each decent performance I have, and write down the things that worked, that didn't work, and maybe some of the things which I could do better. And I might share these with my coach, and we might plan for the next you know, training week or next training weeks, and we might factor in some of the things which I thought could have been better into that training. So it becomes more focused training, which I suppose is the whole idea of around expertise, is that it's an incremental step-based thing where we're learning from our performances, we're learning from all the mistakes, all the crappy performances that we might have had, but we're using it in the right way. So we're not just getting super disappointed and, you know, slamming the car boot and heading off home and not thinking about it again until you show up to training the next day and doing the same training that you've done for the previous few weeks, even though it's not necessarily making you any better. You know, I suppose Einstein defined madness as doing the same things over and over and over again, but expecting different or better results. And I suppose in performance, in Irish dance and in sport, we tend to do the same types of training over and over again, and we just expect to be better, which might be called madness. All right. Because this is what we want, really, isn't it? We want lots of broken plates in practice, in training. We want to make all our mistakes, and we want to learn from our mistakes before we get up onto the stage and do our thing, and are able to do it comfortably or more confidently than we were before. Because this is what it's all about, I suppose, is preparation for particular peaks or particular types of moments where you want to do particularly well or perform well. And then when we think about this idea of a quiet mind, so I suppose for something like dance or Irish dance, there's always this lead up to the performance or to the performances. And like dancers will be really familiar with the kind of big day nerves, getting all the gear on, lining up backstage, competitors, surrounded by your competitors, and cocky competitors beside you and quiet competitors, and really nervous people maybe near you. You know, this idea of contagion, you know, someone's really nervous beside you and they might make you more nervous. Like, how do you deal with that? You know, if someone is particularly nervous, they might make you a bit angsty or a bit jumpy. Like, do you try to get away from them and get around different types of people? And again, it's like knowing yourself, knowing what you're comfortable with. Are you comfortable just doing your own thing? If people are nervous, it's like, whatever, that's good. That's good for me. I just need to do my thing. That's one or two more people who mightn't be a factor today. Or do they need to, you know, get out of that situation and move up the line or whatever it might be? So standing in the wings, then many dancers begin to suffer anxiety about their imminent performance. They have the doubts. We all have the doubts. You know, negative thoughts. God, what if I fall? I can't do this. Geez, that part of the routine is not just down. I'm not that super comfortable with it. And sometimes it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy, can't it? You know, I thought I was going to make an absolute mess of that beforehand, and I did, right at the time when I thought I would. And I've been doing that a few times since. So how do we deal with that? And a lot of the time it comes down to dealing with it in your mind before you actually do it, so that you're more at peace with yourself. And it's just like you're kind of freeing up yourself to just perform when you get up on stage, free from any of that kind of negative thinking which pervades there before you actually go out. And this kind of leads into more performance anxiety. So we think about performance anxiety, we can kind of categorize it into two areas, body or somatic anxiety, and then cognitive or mental anxiety. We're all very familiar with the symptoms or the signs of somatic anxiety. So, you know, heart rate through the roof, maybe feeling a little sick, sweating excessively, clammy hands, etc. We've all been there. You're breathing, noticing your breathing is a bit off, etc. So sometimes it's quite easy to deal with the body anxiety, isn't it? We can control our breathing, and we can take some fresh air, we can have a drink, we can cool ourselves down, or we can, whatever it might be, and we can do things very proactively for that. And I think the cognitive anxiety or the mental anxiety is a little bit harder to deal with, particularly if you haven't trained yourself to deal with it that much. So you have these very pervasive negative thoughts. God, I'm going to make a mess of this. I really hope I don't let my parents down or my coach down. God, I'm really not comfortable with that start of the routine or whatever it might be. And a lot of this is just negative self-talk. So it's just the person negatively speaking to themselves, highlighting the stuff that is bad, that might or might not happen. It hasn't even happened yet, or they might be thinking back to other times when they've made a mess of it. So the way around cognitive anxiety is to actually try and notice your negative self-talk and replace it with better self-talk or positive reinforcement coaching or mantras. You know, I got this. I was this nervous before and I totally nailed it. I was absolutely fine. I know exactly, this is just pre-dance nerves, and I can deal with it. I can deal with it just like I've done before, and they can turn it around in their mind. But some people might not have practiced this, or it might be unfamiliar territory to them because they were very comfortable at certain sessions, but this is the Worlds, or this is a major regional or national event, and they think it's a bigger deal than some of the other ones where they were very comfortable in. So some level of anxiety is normal, totally normal, absolutely fine. So out of 10 in terms of nerves, you know, most people can probably perform really well if they're 5 or 6 nervous out of 10, which is quite nervous. But it's when they get to 7, 8 or 9 that they can really notice that their, you know, hands are shaking and their thinking has just gone really, really poor. So the key then with dealing with performance anxiety is not to get it down to 0. It's not to turn into a Zen Buddhist monk and just get completely chilled and relaxed. It's probably to to be aware that you're at 7 or 8 in terms of nerves, that you're particularly nervous or you're more nervous than you should be. And then it's like, okay, what strategies do I have in my toolbox to deal with these? Well, I can try positive self-talk, and I can read some of the mantras or some of the affirmations that I wrote about myself beforehand, that I practiced so hard. I love this. It's great. This is my opportunity to showcase my skills. I'll look at my coach and I'll look at my parents, and they'll be smiling and giving me kind of really good vibes. So that's what I need to do. All these things are just small strategies to deal with them. And by tapping into some of these strategies, we might be able to get ourselves from a 8 or a 7 nervous down to a 6 or a 5. And we know that we can perform optimally or nail it when we're down to 5 or 6. And we can probably check in with ourselves and notice that we've become less anxious by doing something about it on the way. So then we can feel more ready and we can feel more confident. I hope that explanation makes sense, but I'm happy to chat about it some more at the end. Okay, so if we think about the hallmarks of expertise then, so experts in any domain always have to have opportunities for repetition, opportunities to practice, hours and hours and hours. 10,000 hours was this term coined a while ago, but I won't get into that today, but it's not correct. Anyway, specialist coaching. So to be an expert, you need specialist coaching. So as a coach yourself, you know the importance of it, and it's trying to reiterate that to parents and to performers that they need to work on whatever the specialist being, the mental skills, the physical skills, the technical skills. There always needs to be structured feedback to the performer. So structured feedback is exactly that. It's not negative feedback, it's not positive feedback. It's just that there's a structure around the feedback that you give them. So for example, I worked with a professional rugby team here, Munster Rugby, for a couple of seasons, and their feedback session was always on a Monday morning. They always had a weekend game. So they always knew that the feedback was on a Monday morning, and it was review the game, review your own performance. And what they did was they got 3 work-ons. They were called work-ons for the week. And these weren't, you know, it wasn't the video nasty session where it was like, you did this so poorly, you played like an absolute muppet, etc. It was just like, here's your 3 work-ons this week for the week. There was a review of the game, there was a review of the positives, the negatives, etc. But there was a structure to the feedback they got. They always knew it was on a Monday. It always set themselves up for the week leading up to the next performance. So that's the key part to it, is to have a structure around the feedback that you're giving or that you're receiving. And the really critical one for me and for this idea of expertise is opportunities to correct your errors. So if you don't know what errors you're making, it's very hard to correct them because you're relying on a coach, or you're relying on a parent, or you're relying on other competitors to tell you what they thought might have been wrong. So it's nice to know the errors that you're making in the right way, obviously, and this is where the structured feedback and the specialist coaching comes in. But then it's nice to factor them into your training or your practice schedule for the next week or the next 2 weeks, to actually build in a few little blocks of correcting that technical mistake that they might have made, or that mental mistake that they might have made, losing their concentration at a particular point in the routine. So very important, correcting your errors, I think. All right, so just moving on, then we think about the controllables. So what are the things you can control? So we always say, control what you can control. In psychology, we always think, you know, I can only control my composure, how emotionally stable I am. I can control my work rate when I'm performing or when I'm practicing. I can control my attitude. I can do this. You know, the outcome depends on me. I got this. This is a piece of cake. I love it, whatever it might be. And this might be your attitude or your mindset. And obviously you can control your skills because you're practicing them all the time. You're getting coaching all the time. You can't control your competitors. You can't control the judges. You can't control the temperature in the room, et cetera, et cetera. So they shouldn't factor into this negative kind of cycle of poor thinking. So, and then if we're to summarize this area of research around excellence or expertise, there's a few things here that I just want to highlight. But these are, I suppose, mental skills or mental attributes or characteristics which are associated with excellence. Okay. Number one, it's effective and controllable imagery. So imagining yourself performing certain actions or performing in a certain event and being able to control that imagery. So being able to rewind your routine and correct that little error that you made in your mind before you actually attempt it physically or whatever. So we have very, very keen and very good visualization skills that we use as performers all the time. And I suppose experts use this skill more than non-experts. Focus and distraction control of highlight and yellow, because I think it's a really important part of Irish dancing, maintaining focus during a routine and then maybe not getting distracted pre-routine or post-routine and so on. So being able to block out fellow competitors and nervous people and all that kind of stuff. Number three then is this idea of realistic performance evaluation. I think this is really important when we think about evaluating your performance, don't be so reliant on the judges. Be more reliant on how you think it went and the goals that you had set for that event or that routine, and how you had actually done yourself there before you get particularly disappointed or particularly happy because of how someone else judged it. Commitment, obviously commitment, we called it passion and we called it motivation earlier, but they're all kind of the same ballpark. Planning and organization, again, this kind of comes down to goals that you set for practice, goals that you set for the week, trying to peak at certain times. This idea of self-reinforcement, I think, is key. We called it self-confidence earlier. You have to gain some of it yourself and you have to self-coach yourself. And I suppose the reinforcement aspect is, you know, we all doubt ourselves at particular times, and it's nice to have a reinforcement strategy, whether it be positive self-talk or whether it be affirmations or mantras that you say to yourself that you believe about yourself. Quality practice or expert practice or challenging practice, very, very important. And this idea of resilience and self-regulation, so regulating yourself in certain situations, not getting too nervous, not getting too high, not getting too low, coming back to the, are you athlete 1, 2 or 3, and what is it that you need to do? And then this idea of resilience, which is a kind of a buzz term which is thrown out there, but how resilient are you? How able to deal with setbacks are you? Because if you're an Irish dancer, there's going to be lots and lots of setbacks. We know this. We know that there's lots of disappointments. There's lots of subjective issues with it. And how resilient are you to just keep doing your thing or to keep working at the attributes and skills that you're working on, which you know will make you a better performer all around. And then utilizing support networks. So how do you, what support networks do you have around you as a performer, and how do you utilize them? How do you tap into them? You know, and maybe even writing them down, what certain people do for you. You know, Johnny is brilliant for making me confident and putting his arm around me and, you know, giving me a kind of a, you know, a kind word at just the right time. And maybe my coach is good for giving me a nice little cue or a trigger around, you know, what it is that I need to just focus on just pre going out there or when I'm doing my thing. And so on. So knowing that there's support networks there and what they can do for you. Okay. And then I suppose just finally, before we jump on to questions, then we think about a checklist or a plan for Irish dancers or for performers. So maybe after each decent performance, and performance can be training or practice, we might think about, you know, what worked on that particular performance, what didn't work on that particular performance, and what can I do better? And this is really nice. 3 questions, really easy to do. It's not this post-mortem, huge post-mortem, which you might do after an event. You might just be in the shower, in the car afterwards, think about what went particularly well, what didn't go great, what could be better. And then the lovely part is just the follow through then. What is it that I need to do now? And this question just sets up your practice and your training for the next day. And you might jot down a few things that you'd like to do or you'd like to chat to your coach about for the next day. And then that gives you a nice renewed focus and hopefully a little bit of positivity leading into the next kind of week of training leading up to the next event. And because at the end of the day, you know, we talk about personal responsibility, and personal responsibility is just the performer takes all the plaudits when they win or do perform particularly well, but they also have to shoulder, I suppose, the disappointment of maybe not doing their best when it matters most. And then can they have this resilient checklist or plan that they can come up with and then work kind of proactively at that as they move forward. All right, I think that's pretty much it for my slides, but I'll happily send these on to Roisin, and Roisin can share them out there as well if you've been trying to take notes, or if I went too quick or if I went too slow. But I'm happy to delve into anything or answer any questions that you might have. But thanks, Roisin, for the invite, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you, Mark. You're fading into the darkness there.
I know, I'm going to have to throw light on one sec.
That was amazing. I think some really important points there, particularly about enjoyment and personal responsibility and what we can do. And there's so many simple strategies that I think a lot of us, we just don't exercise the psychological facet, the mental skills that contribute so much to how we can actually improve as dancers and as coaches and as parents. If anybody has questions, they can either unmute or they can type them in. Mark, there's been a quick request if you could do something about breathing Any breathing demonstrations? Or is that beyond the remit?
No, I suppose at the most simple level, it's about knowing your own body and trying to get your breathing down to a manageable level. And a lot of the time, breath control is around, breathing deeply into your diaphragm, so down into your belly, and being able to hold it there. So the idea is that you should probably work towards it, as in you should probably try to deepen your breaths a little bit as you go, but you inhale for approximately 2 to 3 seconds and you try to hold it for the same amount of time, and then you try to breathe out for the same amount of time. So it's about controlling the intake, controlling when it's in there and controlling it out. Because when we do notice that our breathing is a bit off, we're taking really shallow breaths and our heart rate is up and we're noticing all sorts of somatic sensations. So the idea is then is to kind of try to work it back to a kind of a deeper breathing, but I wouldn't start, gasping for air straight away when you notice that your breathing is a bit off. I think that might be counterproductive.
And like you say, it's one of these skills that you probably need to just work on and develop and just have it in your arsenal.
Yeah, and there's loads of apps out there, like on the App Store, around breath control and breathing and mindfulness and progressive muscular relaxation and things like that. Probably just dip in and try some of them out, rather than this is the exact way to do it. There might be an exact way to do it for some people or for some patient groups or whatever, but not for performers, because we have different lung capacities and things like that.
Okay, so again, it's what works for you and knowing your own body, which is one of your key things. Just there from MJP Academy. So thank you so much. Exactly what we needed. I think you touched on so many really good things. I was kind of nodding away to myself, listening to you. And it's amazing how elite athletes and how you can apply things to different sports and also to dance. They have such similar mindsets and such similar challenges and potentials, I think, is the other thing. How you can get that edge by working on these skills.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of overlap, isn't there? There's a lot of overlap, and we call it just performance domains, because you might be in business or in industry, and it might be the same types of things. It's the same mental skills you need to excel, whether it be job based or sport based or dance based.
Okay. We don't seem to have any other questions, but what I'll do is that we've recorded this session, so I'll make it available and I'll post it on the Complete Dancer page. And Mark, if anybody has questions, they can send them to me and I can forward them on to you, or we can make your details available as well, if that's...
Yeah, great. Okay. Happy to do either. Yeah. I'll send on the slides to you, Roisin, anyway. You can share them out there, and if people want to contact you, then drive on.
Perfect. Okay, and to everybody, thank you for attending. It's lovely to have people all over the world here. And I'll ask you just to share it with your fellow dancers, people in your schools or in your areas, and we'll try and improve the health and the performance of Irish dancers globally. So good night or good morning, wherever you are, and thank you all very much.
Thanks, Roisin. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Mark.